They had guns pointed at him before he even stepped out of the car. Marcus hadn't even turned off the engine when the police doors slammed open. Officers rushing out like something dangerous was already confirmed. No questions, no warning. Just loud commands cutting through the air, sharp enough to freeze everything in place. Hands up. Don't move. His fingers lifted slowly from the steering wheel, rising into the air where they could be seen. Every movement controlled, careful, deliberate. The flashing red and blue lights bounced across the windshield, across his face, across the inside of the car, turning a normal moment into something that didn't feel real anymore. I didn't do anything, Marcus said, his voice steady. But the words didn't land. Because no one was listening yet. They were reacting. The driver's door was yanked open from the outside, and Marcus felt the cold air rush in as an officer grabbed his arm, pulling him out before he could even unbuckle properly. His feet hit the ground unevenly, but he kept his balance, his hands still raised, his body still calm. Turn around, another voice shouted. Marcus complied immediately, turning slowly, keeping his movements visible, predictable, exactly the way he knew they needed to be in a situation like this. He felt hands grab his wrists, pulling them behind his back, the metal cuffs clicking into place faster than his mind could process what was happening. The pressure tightened, not painful, but firm enough to remind him that control wasn't his anymore. What's going on? Marcus asked. No answer. Just more movement. One officer stepped back, scanning him again, while another moved toward the car, shining a flashlight inside, even though the streetlights were already bright enough to see everything clearly. Across the road, cars slowed slightly, drivers turning their heads to look, then speeding up again, not stopping, not getting involved, just witnessing for a second before moving on. Same road. Same moment. Different reality. Marcus stood there, hands cuffed behind him, the cold metal resting against his wrists, his breathing steady, his expression calm, but his awareness sharper than ever. What did I do? He asked again. This time, one of the officers responded. Matching description, he said. Marcus nodded slightly. Description of what? He asked. The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured toward the patrol car. Marcus moved forward, guided but not forced, his steps measured, his posture upright. He sat down on the edge of the curb when instructed, the rough concrete beneath him grounding the moment in a way that made everything feel more real. Another patrol car pulled up, then another, the flashing lights multiplying, turning the street into something louder, brighter, more intense. A third officer stepped out, looking directly at Marcus. That him? He asked. Could be, one of the others replied. Could be. Marcus let those words settle. Not confirmed. Not certain. Just enough to act. The third officer stepped closer, his eyes focused, studying Marcus carefully, like he was trying to match a picture that wasn't fully clear. What's your name? He asked. Marcus, he replied. Full name, Marcus gave it. The officer nodded slightly, then glanced at the others. ID, it's in the car, Marcus said. One of the officers retrieved it, flipping through it quickly, checking the details, then holding it under the light, comparing the photo to the person sitting in front of them. Another pause. Another moment where nothing was said. Then finally, the third officer spoke again. Where are you coming from? Work, Marcus replied. What kind of work? Marcus answered, his voice steady, his tone unchanged. The questions kept coming, one after another, each one simple on its own, but together forming something heavier, something that felt like it was trying to confirm a decision that had already been made. Then finally, Marcus asked again. What is this about? The officer hesitated this time, just for a second. There was a report, he said. Armed robbery. Vehicle like yours. Individual like you. Marcus looked at him, his expression still calm, but his eyes focused. Like me how? He asked. Another pause. Longer this time. The officer didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked back at the others, a silent exchange happening again, something shifting, something adjusting. Marcus sat there, the cuffs still tight around his wrists, the street still moving around him, the world continuing as if nothing unusual was happening. Across the road, another car passed. No sirens. No stop. No questions. Same conditions. Different outcome. Minutes passed. Then one of the officers' radios crackled, a voice coming through, low but clear enough to catch the change in tone. Suspect located. Different location. Silence followed. The kind of silence that didn't need explanation. The third officer looked at the others, then back at Marcus. Another shift, subtle, but clear. He stepped forward and reached for the cuffs, unlocking them with a quick motion, the metal loosening, then falling away from Marcus's wrists. You're good, he said. Just like that. No build-up. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what had just happened. Marcus stood up slowly, rubbing his wrists lightly, not because they hurt, but because the feeling of them still lingered. That's it, he asked. The officer nodded. Wrong match, he said. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then at the cars. Then at the lights. Then back at him. No explanation, Marcus asked. The officer didn't respond. Because there wasn't one ready. Marcus let out a slow breath, not frustrated, not angry, just aware. He walked back to his car, opened the door, and sat down, placing his hands back on the steering wheel for a moment before starting the engine. The flashing lights were still there behind him. Still bright. Still loud. But different now. Because now he knew how fast everything could change. He pulled back onto the road, merging into traffic, the patrol cars fading behind him, the city returning to its normal rhythm. But the moment didn't fade. It stayed. Not as something loud, but as something clear. Because it wasn't about what eventually happened. It was about how quickly it happened. How fast assumptions turned into action. How little time there was between being seen and being judged. Marcus drove in silence, the road stretching ahead, the lights of the city reflecting off the windshield, his hands steady on the wheel. The system worked. It corrected itself. It ended without damage. But the path it took to get there, that was the part that stayed with him. Because once you experience how quickly a moment can escalate before the truth is even known, you don't forget it. You don't ignore it. You carry it forward. And the next time those lights appear behind you, you won't wonder what might happen. You'll already know how fast it can. Marcus didn't speed up after pulling back onto the road. If anything, he drove a little slower than before, not because he needed to, but because his body hadn't fully caught up to what had just happened. The flashing lights faded. In his rearview mirror, shrinking into small points before disappearing completely. But the feeling of them didn't go with it. His hands stayed steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his awareness was sharper now, tuned to every small detail, every passing car, every reflection in the mirrors. The street looked exactly the same as it had before he was pulled over, the same traffic. The same rhythm, nothing visibly different, and that contrast sat quietly in his mind. A few blocks later, he stopped at a red light. Cars lined up on both sides, engines idling, drivers glancing at their phones, adjusting the radio, living in their own moments without interruption. Marcus sat there in silence, his fingers resting lightly against the steering wheel, his breathing slow and controlled. To anyone else, it looked like just another stop at a light. To him, it felt like a pause after something that shouldn't have happened the way it did. The light turned green and traffic moved again. Marcus followed, merging smoothly, his focus steady, but his thoughts no longer questioning anything. The situation had already answered itself. He drove for a while without turning on the radio, letting the quiet fill the space instead. The city lights reflected off the windshield, creating soft patterns that moved with the car, constant but shifting, just like everything else around him. Eventually, he pulled into a gas station, not because he needed fuel, but because he needed a moment to step out of the car and let the tension fully leave his body. He parked near the edge, turned off the engine, and sat there for a second before opening the door. The night air felt cooler now, steady against his skin, grounding in a way the inside of the car hadn't been. He walked slowly toward the small convenience store, then stopped halfway, changing his mind, deciding he didn't actually need anything. So he just stood there. Hands relaxed at his sides, eyes scanning the quiet surroundings. A couple of people moved in and out of the store, casual and hurried, their interactions simple, uninterrupted. One man paid for a drink and walked out without a second thought, getting into his car and driving off. Marcus watched that for a moment, then looked away. Not comparing, just noticing. After a minute, he walked back to his car and leaned lightly against the door, looking up at the sky. The city lights dimmed the stars, but a few still pushed through, faint but visible. He let out a slow breath. It would have been easy to replay everything in his head over and over again, to go through every second, every word, every action, trying to make sense of it in a way that felt complete. But it already was complete. Not because it ended cleanly, but because it revealed something clearly. Marcus got back into the car and started the engine again, pulling out of the gas station and heading toward home. The streets became more familiar as he got closer, the turns automatic, the route something he didn't have to think about. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, the quiet settling in again, different from before, calmer, more grounded. He stepped out and walked toward his front door, unlocking it and stepping inside. The space felt the same as always, steady, and changed, a place where nothing unexpected had happened. He placed his keys down and moved further inside, his steps slow, his posture relaxed. Then he paused. Not because he was unsure, but because something had shifted. Not outside, not inside. Marcus sat down on the couch, leaning back slightly, his hands resting calmly in front of him. The events of the night didn't feel chaotic anymore. They had settled into something simple, clear. He understood now that it wasn't about one stop. It wasn't about one mistake. It was about how quickly a moment could turn into something serious based on something as small as a description. Something as broad as a match. And how little time there was between normal and not. Marcus looked down at his hands for a second, then back up, his expression unchanged. He knew that the next time he saw those lights in the mirror, his reaction wouldn't come from uncertainty. It would come from experience, from understanding how fast things can escalate, how quickly assumptions can take control before facts arrive. He stood up slowly and walked toward the window, looking outside at the quiet street. A car passed by, headlights sweeping across the road before disappearing into the distance. Everything looked normal. Everything felt calm. But that awareness stayed. Not heavy. Not overwhelming. Just present. Because once you've seen how quickly a situation can shift based on nothing more than a momentary decision, you don't forget it. You don't ignore it. You carry it forward. And you move through the world knowing that sometimes the difference between being safe and being questioned happens faster than you expect. Marcus turned away from the window and walked back into the room, the night settling around him, the day finally complete. But the understanding it left behind was something that would stay far longer than the moment itself.